The cold echo of a spectral sigh still lingers in the rusted hallways of Cranbrook Asylum. Peeling walls, once silent witnesses to endless suffering, now whisper secrets to the icy breeze that sweeps through the abandoned rooms. The shadow of a grim past clings to every corner, a story of neglect and despair that left invisible, yet deeply felt scars. They say the very bricks absorbed the anguish of forgotten patience, and on moonless nights, their cries echo through the tomb-like silence. Prepare yourself to step into a world where the line between sanity and madness fades, and where the echoes of the past cry out for justice. If you've ever felt a chill down your spine with no clear reason, if you've heard a faint whisper in the stillness of the night, then you're in the right place. Welcome to our channel, a space dedicated to unraveling mysteries that defy logic. Before we dive into this unsettling tale, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. We want to know where you're joining us from on this dark journey through history's forgotten corners. Share your city in the comments and get ready to question everything you believe. My name is Alistair Finch, and for years I worked as a nurse at Cranbrook Asylum. I saw things no man should ever witness, horrors the mind struggles to comprehend. The facade of care and treatment masked a brutal reality, where hope withered as quickly as the patient's health. But it was the years after the asylum closed that truly tested my sanity. The ghosts of my memory were joined by something more, ethereal presences that seemed to echo the suffering I had once witnessed. The first time it happened was on a stormy night, years after the last patient had been transferred. I had returned to the asylum, gripped by a morbid curiosity, perhaps searching for redemption for all the years I remained silent. In the old dining hall, where so many cold, lonely meals had been served, I heard a faint murmur. It wasn't words, but the resonance of countless anguished voices. A ghostly chorus that froze me in terror. The temperature dropped sharply, and a formless shadow danced in the corner of the room before dissolving into nothing. The following week, the phenomena grew stronger. Objects moved on their own in my house. Doors creaked open with no breeze. The nauseating smell of disinfectant hung in the air, even though no bottle had been opened in years. I knew I wasn't alone. The tormented souls of Cranbrook had followed me, perhaps seeking a witness to their long-silenced pain. But the worst was yet to come, something that would make me question the very fabric of reality. I decided to search for answers, diving into the asylum's dusty archives. Scribbled medical records, desperate letters from families. It all painted a dark picture of cruelty and neglect. I uncovered stories of forgotten patients, of brutal treatments, and unexplained deaths. The more I read, the stronger the feeling grew that something evil had taken root within those walls, fed by the suffering of so many innocent lives. And I was about to become part of that twisted history. One night, while studying an old map of the asylum, I noticed an undocumented underground section. Intrigued, and filled with a growing sense of dread, I chose to explore it. Armed with nothing but a flickering flashlight, I descended the damp, crumbling stairs. The air grew colder and heavier with each step. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the steady drip of water and the pounding of my own heart. What I found in the forgotten depths of Cranbrook Asylum would change my life forever. The darkness in the depths of the asylum was nearly tangible, swallowing the faint glow of my flashlight. The air was thick with the smell of mold and damp earth, making each breath a struggle. As I moved down a narrow corridor, the rough stone walls seemed to close in on me, whispering inaudible secrets. At the end of the hallway, a massive wooden door, covered in rust, blocked my path. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming for me to turn back, but the need to uncover the truth behind this forsaken place was stronger than fear. With a guttural creak, the door gave way, revealing a circular chamber. In the center stood a stained stone altar, and grotesque carvings adorned the walls. A sense of desecration hung thick in the air, as if dark rituals had once been performed there. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind snuffed out my flashlight, plunging me into complete darkness. A chilling whisper brushed against my ear, a voice ancient and filled with malice, calling my name. Panic rooted me in place as I felt invisible presences closing in, brushing against my arms, murmuring obscenities. Amid the sensory chaos, a faint light began to emanate from the altar. A spectral figure started to materialize, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to absorb all light around them. It extended a skeletal hand toward me, and a searing pain shot through my body, as though my very life force was being drained. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. The creature crept closer, and I feared that this would be my end, sealed forever in the cursed depths of Cranbrook Asylum. Then, as suddenly as it began, the torment stopped. The ghostly light faded, and the unseen entities retreated. My flashlight, inexplicably, flickered back to life, casting light on an empty chamber. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, terrified, trying to process what had just occurred. This was not merely the manifestation of disturbed souls. There was something else there. A conscious, malevolent force dwelled in the depths of the asylum, and I had awakened its attention. I knew I could no longer ignore what was happening. The manifestations in my home, the whispers, the oppressive presence, they were all connected to that cursed place. I decided to seek help, someone who might understand or at least believe what I was experiencing. That's when I found Sarah, a young paranormal researcher with a reputation for cautious skepticism. I was hesitant to share my story, afraid of being dismissed as insane, but the intensity of the events compelled me to seek her expertise. Sarah listened intently, her piercing blue eyes locked onto mine. She didn't immediately dismiss my experiences, nor did she accept them blindly. She suggested an investigation at Cranbrook Asylum, equipped with recording devices and sensors, hoping to find a rational explanation for the phenomena. I agreed, knowing it was risky, but also feeling it was the only way to confront the terror that haunted me. What we didn't know was that our search for answers would lead us to a confrontation with something far more sinister than we could have ever imagined. The next night, we returned to the asylum. The atmosphere was even heavier than during my previous visit, a foreboding sign that something dreadful was about to unfold. As we set up our equipment in the old main hall, we heard a dragging noise coming from the floor above. Sarah, maintaining her calm professionalism, switched on the camera and whispered, "Let's see what our tenants have to say." We climbed the decaying stairs, each step echoing in the tomb-like silence. What awaited us at the top would shatter everything we thought we knew about life and death. Upstairs, we found one of the old patient rooms. The rusted bed was still there with tattered, yellowed sheets. A rocking chair creaked softly, even though there was no wind. Sarah pointed the camera at the chair, a glint of professional excitement in her eyes. Suddenly, a dark figure darted across the hallway in the background, disappearing into another room before we could react. Sarah rushed after it, but the room was empty. As we examined the empty room, we heard a faint sobbing coming from another area. We followed the sound, which grew louder as we approached. We found a small room with childish drawings scribbled on the walls. In the corner, the spectral figure of a child rocked gently, silently sobbing. Sarah tried to approach, speaking in a low, soothing voice, but the ghost seemed unaware of our presence, trapped in eternal sorrow. The scene was heartbreaking, a grim reminder of the suffering that lingered in that place. Suddenly, the lights on our equipment began to flicker erratically. The air turned cold, and a sense of hostility filled the room. The child's sobbing ceased, replaced by a threatening whisper that seemed to come from all directions. "Leave! This place is ours." The voice was guttural and full of rage, very different from the sorrowful cry we heard moments before. Sarah turned pale but kept the camera steady, recording everything. We tried to communicate, asking who was there and what they wanted. The response was a piercing scream that made our ears ring. The room's doors and windows slammed shut violently, trapping us inside. We felt invisible presences touching us, pulling our hair, whispering threats into our ears. The fear was palpable, almost suffocating. Sarah stumbled and fell, dropping the camera. In the sudden darkness, I felt something grip my arm with supernatural strength. I struggled to break free, but the force was overwhelming. I felt sharp nails digging into my skin, and a stench of rotting flesh filled my nose. I screamed in pain and terror as the invisible creature tried to drag me away. Sarah, fumbling in the dark, found the camera and turned it back on. The light revealed a misshapen shadow hovering over me, its outline twisting in unnatural ways. Its eyes glowed with pure, terrifying malevolence. In that moment of sheer horror, Sarah screamed and threw the camera at the shadow. The impact seemed to have some effect, as the grip on me loosened. I took the opportunity to break free and pulled Sarah out of the room. We ran through the dark hallways, chased by angry whispers and unexplainable noises. We knew we had awakened something dangerous, something that didn't want its secrets uncovered. Our investigation had turned into a desperate fight for survival. We managed to escape the upper floor and stumbled down the stairs. When we reached the main hall, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang, locking us inside the asylum. We were trapped, at the mercy of the dark forces that resided there. I looked at Sarah, whose face was pale and marked by terror. We knew the night would be long, and our search for answers had become a nightmare from which we might not escape. Whatever haunted Cranbrook Asylum wasn't going to let us go easily. Trapped in the main hall, we desperately tried to find a way out. The windows were locked and seemed sealed by an invisible force. The interior doors creaked erratically, as if unseen entities were moving between the rooms. The air was heavy with an oppressive energy, making it hard to breathe. Sarah checked the equipment, but the readings were chaotic, with inexplicable spikes in electromagnetic activity. It was as if the asylum itself were alive, reacting to our presence with growing fury. Suddenly, a high-pitched, piercing sound echoed through the hall, making our ears ache. The shadows stretched and twisted on the walls, taking on grotesque and threatening shapes. We felt invisible eyes watching us, a sense of malevolent scrutiny that froze us in fear. Sarah tripped over something on the floor and fell. It was an old medical file, open to a page with scribbled notes about a patient named Silas. The descriptions were disturbing, mentioning violent behavior and dark forces that influenced him. As Sarah examined the file, a spectral figure appeared at the top of the staircase. It was a tall, thin man with a face twisted in rage and agony. His eyes glowed with an intense red light, and he radiated an aura of pure hatred. He pointed a skeletal finger at us, and a guttural scream echoed through the hall, making the window panes tremble. It was the same threatening voice we'd heard in the child's room, only now amplified, filled with even greater malevolence. The spectral figure slowly descended the stairs, his silent footsteps echoing eerily through the hall. We tried to run into another room, but doors slammed shut in front of us, as if the asylum itself were cornering us. We were paralyzed by terror as the malignant presence drew closer. Sarah gripped my hand tightly, her eyes wide with fear. We knew we were facing something far more powerful and dangerous than we had imagined, something that seemed to have complete control over that cursed place. When the spectral figure was just a few feet away, a chorus of whispers filled the hall. Indistinct voices, filled with pain and anger, surrounded us, as if all the asylum's ghosts had gathered around. The shadows thickened, closing in from all directions. We felt cold hands touch us, tug at our clothes, whisper threats in our ears. The sensation of being surrounded by countless malevolent entities was overwhelming. Suddenly, a heavy object fell from the ceiling, crashing to the floor with a loud bang. It was an old chandelier, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Amid the dust and shards of glass, Silas's spectral figure vanished, as if summoned and then dispersed by that sudden event. Silence returned to the hall, but the atmosphere remained heavy and threatening. We knew we weren't safe, that this brief pause was only a prelude to an even greater horror. We looked at each other, our faces pale and soaked in sweat. The experience had shaken us deeply, but it had also awakened a dark resolve. We couldn't give up. We couldn't let the tormented souls of this place remain trapped in suffering. We decided we would uncover the truth behind Silas's story and the darkness that loomed over Cranbrook Asylum, even if it cost us our lives. But we had no idea just how terrible that truth would be. Determined to uncover Silas's secrets, we returned to the dusty archives, searching for more information about his past. We found additional files detailing his increasing agitation, his reports of voices and shadows that tormented him, and the brutal treatments he had endured. It became clear that Silas was not merely a violent patient, but someone suffering from an inexplicable torment, perhaps even being influenced by the very darkness that permeated the asylum. In one of the files, we found a scribbled note from a former doctor mentioning unconventional experiments conducted on certain patients, including Silas. There were vague references to inducing altered states of consciousness and attempts to release repressed psychic energy. Reading it sent a chill down our spines, suggesting that the suffering of Cranbrook's patients may have been even more horrific than we had imagined, possibly caused by questionable medical interventions. Following a lead found in one of the files, we discovered the location of an old laboratory in the asylum's basement, adjacent to the chamber where I had my first terrifying encounter. We descended once again into the dark depths, the atmosphere growing denser and colder with each step. As we entered the ruined laboratory, we were met with a macabre scene. Rusted surgical instruments, shattered vials containing unknown substances, and a metal table stained with dried blood. In the center of the lab, we found a leather-bound journal. The pages were yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting was clear and legible. It was the diary of the doctor who had made the notes about the experiments. The early entries described his efforts to understand the human mind and treat mental illness, but gradually his notes grew darker, revealing a dangerous obsession with exploring the shadowy depths of the human psyche. The final pages of the journal detailed his experiments with Silas, describing how he attempted to amplify Silas's psychic perceptions in hopes of understanding the nature of the voices that haunted him. There were mentions of strange rituals and the use of consciousness-altering substances. The reading was disturbing, suggesting the doctor had inadvertently opened a door to something sinister, using Silas as a test subject in his dangerous experiments. As we read the journal, we felt a cold presence drawing near. The lights on our equipment began to flicker again, and indistinct whispers filled the laboratory. A shadow began to materialize in the corner of the room, its form unclear, but radiating a sense of pure malevolence. We knew we had gotten too close to the truth, and the dark force that haunted this place did not want its secrets revealed. We were about to face the consequences of our search for the truth. Suddenly, the journal was ripped from my hands by an unseen force and hurled against the wall, its pages scattering across the floor. The shadow moved toward us, its contours becoming more defined, revealing the distorted figure of a humanoid with glowing red eyes. It was Silas, but something had corrupted him, turning him into a vessel for an entity far older and more evil. And now that entity had set its sights on us. The creature that had once been Silas lunged toward us, its burning red eyes filled with ancient hatred. A guttural scream tore from its twisted throat, a sound that seemed to carry the pain of everyone who had died in that place. We tried to back away, but an invisible force held us in place. The air grew dense and suffocating, making it hard to breathe. Sarah pointed her flashlight directly at the creature's face, but it only seemed to enrage it further. Suddenly, objects in the lab began to levitate. Shattered vials, rusted instruments, even the heavy metal table trembled. They were hurled at us with violent force, forcing us to dodge frantically. We knew we couldn't fight something like this with conventional means. We had to find a way to weaken the entity that had taken over Silas, or we would be destroyed. In the chaos, my eyes landed on a strange symbol carved into the wall behind the metal table. It was a circle with intricate designs inside, something I hadn't noticed before. I felt a strange familiarity with the symbol, a vague memory of seeing it in one of the old patient files. Maybe it was a key, a way to contain or repel the darkness attacking us. As the creature closed in, I prepared to make a move toward the symbol. Sarah seemed to understand what I was trying to do and created a distraction by throwing some of the equipment at the entity. It gave us a few precious seconds, just enough for me to dash toward the wall. But before I could touch the symbol, an invisible force hurled me backward, slamming me into a metal shelf. Pain shot through my body, and I tasted blood in my mouth. Dazed, I saw the creature advancing on Sarah, its elongated claws ready to strike. Sarah screamed, but just before the blow landed, a bright light burst from the symbol on the wall. The creature recoiled, letting out a howl of agony. The light seemed to burn its shadowy form, causing it to stumble backward. The lab shook, and the levitating objects crashed to the floor with a loud clatter. Seizing the opportunity, I helped Sarah to her feet. The light from the symbol pulsed stronger and stronger, and the oppressive presence in the lab began to fade. The creature, visibly weakened, let out a final roar of rage before dissipating into the shadows. Silence returned to the laboratory, though the air still buzzed with a lingering energy. We knew we had won a battle, but the war against the darkness of Cranbrook Asylum was far from over, and that symbol on the wall seemed to be the key to understanding the true nature of the evil that dwelled within. With the creature momentarily driven back, we examined the symbol on the wall more closely. It was more than just a carving. It looked like a portal, a connection between dimensions. The intricate lines pulsed with a faint energy, and I felt a strange resonance as I touched it. Sarah, with her analytical mind, began photographing and analyzing the symbol, searching for parallels in ancient texts and occult references. She found mentions of containment rituals and entities imprisoned in other planes of existence. Sarah's theory was disturbing. The doctor who conducted experiments on Silas might have inadvertently opened a portal or awakened a dormant entity, using the patient's suffering and psychic energy as a catalyst. Silas, with his sensitivity and torment, may have become a fragile link, eventually possessed by the malevolent force that crossed through. The symbol on the wall could have been an attempt to seal the breach, one that had either failed or been left incomplete. As Sarah pieced together her theory, the lab began to tremble again. Shadows deepened, and the temperature dropped drastically. Angry whispers echoed through the walls, louder and more coordinated than before. We could feel the entity regrouping, furious for being repelled. We knew we had little time to understand what was happening and to find a way to permanently seal the portal. Suddenly, a wave of visions flooded my mind, fragments of memories that weren't mine. Suffering faces, screams of agony, dark rituals performed in the central chamber. I saw the obsessed doctor chanting strange incantations near the symbol, Silas chained and screaming in terror, and a dark, tentacled shadow emerging from an invisible rift in the air. The visions came fast and chaotic, but they revealed the horrifying truth behind Cranbrook Asylum. I realized the symbol wasn't just a seal, it was also a channel, offering glimpses into the other side. The entity that possessed Silas wasn't a tormented spirit, but something far older and more malevolent, imprisoned in another dimension and feeding on human suffering. The doctor's experiments had weakened the seal, allowing the entity to gain power and finally find a host in Silas. We knew that confronting this entity directly would be suicide. We had to find a way to reactivate or strengthen the seal, to close the portal before the creature could fully manifest in our world. Sarah remembered seeing references to a sealing ritual in the ancient texts she had reviewed. The ritual required a sacrifice of pure energy and a deep understanding of the symbols and incantations. We looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. We knew what had to be done, even if the price would be steep. The darkness at Cranbrook Asylum had fed on suffering for too long, and it was our responsibility to end it, for the trapped souls and for ourselves. But the entity wouldn't let us succeed easily. We could feel its presence closing in, stronger and more furious than ever. The final battle for Cranbrook Asylum was about to begin. The presence of the entity intensified, filling the lab with a paralyzing cold. Shadows danced frantically, and menacing whispers buzzed in our ears, trying to break our focus. The creature's indistinct form began to materialize again, its red eyes glowing fiercely in the darkness. We could feel its palpable rage, its determination to stop us from interfering with its plans. Sarah quickly began reciting the words of the ritual she had memorized, her voice steady despite the fear. The symbols surrounding the portal on the wall started to glow more brightly in response to her words. However, the entity seemed to react violently to the ritual's energy, hurling objects at us with telekinetic force. We had to dodge constantly, doing our best to protect Sarah as she continued chanting the incantations. I realized the entity was trying to distract us, to prevent the ritual from being completed. Its fury seemed to escalate with every word Sarah spoke, and its attacks grew more aggressive. A metal table was slammed into the wall with a crash, and surgical tools flew through the air like deadly projectiles. It was a desperate battle against a supernatural force that refused to be banished. As Sarah continued the ritual, I felt a strange connection to the symbol on the wall. It was as if it were responding to my own energy, vibrating in sync with my heartbeat. A wave of heat surged through me, and I felt a strange force growing inside, an energy I had never experienced before, yet somehow it felt familiar, like a distant memory being awakened. Suddenly, flashes of my own experiences at the asylum flooded my mind. I remembered the fear, the anguish of the patients, but also brief moments of hope and compassion. I realized that, somehow, I had absorbed part of this place's energy, both the darkness and fragments of light, and maybe that energy could be used to fuel the ritual. Without saying a word to Sarah, I placed my hands on the symbol, channeling the energy I felt flowing through me. The portal's light flared even brighter, pulsing with an almost blinding force. The entity screamed in agony, retreating into the shadows. It seemed to be burning in the growing light of the seal. We knew we were close to victory, but the final battle wasn't over yet. The entity would do anything to avoid being imprisoned again. With the symbol glowing brightly, the entity retreated into the shadows, but its malevolent presence still lingered in the lab. We knew it was only a matter of time before it made one last desperate attempt to strike. Sarah kept reciting the incantations, her voice taking on a tone of urgency. The energy radiating from the portal seemed to be weakening the creature, but not destroying it completely. Suddenly, the entity's form began to distort and expand, becoming a shapeless mass of shadows and whispers. Dark tendrils reached out toward us, trying to ensnare us. It was a manifestation of pure terror, the essence of evil that had rooted itself in that place. We knew that if it caught us, we would be consumed by its darkness. I remembered the words from the ancient text Sarah had read. The ritual required a sacrifice of pure energy. I looked at Sarah, her determined eyes fixed on the portal. I realized that we both knew what had to be done. Together, we channeled our remaining energy into the symbol, intensifying the light it emitted. It was an exhausting effort, our life force draining away, but we knew it was the only way to seal the entity back into its plane of existence. The portal's light reached its peak, flooding the lab in a blinding radiance. The mass of shadows screamed in agony, its tendrils writhing and disintegrating in the light. The cold, oppressive presence began to fade, and the angry whispers dwindled into silence. Slowly, the light dimmed, revealing a quiet, still lab. The entity was gone. We collapsed to the floor, trembling from the effort. The portal on the wall still glowed faintly, a reminder of the danger we had faced. We knew we had succeeded, that we had banished the darkness from Cranbrook Asylum, at least for now. But the experience had changed us forever. We had seen what lurks in the shadows, and we knew that evil never truly disappears. It merely waits for the chance to return. As we slowly stood up, unsteady, we noticed something strange on the ground near the portal. It was the doctor's journal flung aside during the battle. I picked it up and flipped to the last page. There was a final entry, written in shaky, desperate handwriting. "I opened the gate. They are coming." Those words sent a chill through our blood. The entity we banished wasn't the only one. There was something else, something even older and more terrifying, waiting in the shadows. And Cranbrook Asylum was only the beginning. The final words of the diary hung in the air like a dark sentence. They are coming. Who were they? What else lurked on the other side of the portal that the doctor had inadvertently opened? The victory we had felt moments before turned into a cold, paralyzing apprehension. We knew our journey was far from over, that Cranbrook Asylum was only the tip of a cosmic terror iceberg. We looked at the portal in the wall, its soft light now seeming sinister, like the calm eye of an impending storm. The feeling that something was watching us, something ancient and unfathomable, was undeniable. The air was heavy with a sinister expectation, as if the very fabric of reality was stretching to accommodate something terrible. We knew we couldn't just leave, ignoring the warning left by the mad doctor. We decided we needed to understand the extent of the threat. Cautiously, we returned to the files, searching for any mention of other entities, rituals for opening portals, anything that could give us a clue about what was to come. We found references to an old local legend, whispered in fear, about dark beings imprisoned beneath the earth, awakened by acts of profanation and human madness. The legend spoke of an ancient being, known only as the Archivist, who fed on suffering and chaos, and of its servants, lesser entities that prepared the way for its return. The descriptions eerily matched what we had faced and the warning left in the diary. The doctor, in his insane quest for knowledge, had not only opened a portal but had also alerted the Archivist to the existence of our world. The realization hit us with the force of a blow. Cranbrook Asylum was not the end, but the beginning. The entity we had banished was probably one of the servants, sent to test the defenses of our world. And now, alerted to our existence, the Archivist was on its way. The scale of the threat was far greater than we had ever imagined. We knew we had a choice to make: flee and try to forget the horror we had witnessed, or prepare for the battle ahead. We looked at each other, and in our eyes, we found the same dark determination. We couldn't let this darkness spread. We had to find a way to close the portal once and for all and prevent the Archivist from arriving, even if it meant facing an unimaginable power. As we prepared for what was to come, a shadow moved in the corner of the lab. It wasn't the same shadow as the entity we had banished. It was darker, denser, with an aura of cold, calculating power. Two red eyes opened in the darkness, watching us with a sinister intelligence. A voice whispered in our minds, not through our ears, but directly in our thoughts, cold and full of dark promises. "You cannot stop me. The time of awakening has come." The final terror had arrived.